And Guy, you were Wild Bill Hickok.
I did the Wild Bill Hickok television show for 7 years, yeah, along with Andy Devine.
You probably remember Guy Madison as the tall, handsome cowboy who made hearts race without saying much. But what you didn't see was the private world he kept hidden behind those steady eyes. In a time when one wrong word could ruin a career, Madison carried a secret life filled with love, fear, and forbidden connection. Years later, Madison quietly revealed the names of several gay actors he had dated in secret. So who were these famous men? The truth is more gripping than anything. The untold story of Guy Madison. Guy Madison wasn't loud, but his presence filled the screen. With calm eyes and a steady voice, he played the kind of roles that made him a hero to many. Western fans especially knew him as the brave and dependable Wild Bill Hickok. But behind those perfect features and polished charm was a man who kept much of his real life locked away. Born as Robert Ozell Mosley, he never planned to become an actor. He was discovered by chance when he visited Hollywood while on leave from the Navy. His looks alone caught the attention of a talent scout, and soon he found himself in front of the camera. It all seemed like a dream. Suddenly, he was being cast in romantic dramas, war films, and eventually the television series that made him a household name. But while America saw him as the all-American cowboy, Madison was dealing with a very different reality. He was quiet off camera, polite to everyone, and rarely gave away more than he needed to. Co-stars described him as kind and humble, someone who did not crave the spotlight, even though it followed him everywhere. One former studio hairdresser once said, "He was the type of man who made everyone feel safe. He listened more than he spoke." You always knew he was carrying something heavy inside, but he never showed it. Madison's personal life was not without struggle. His marriage to actress Gail Russell ended in divorce, and he never remarried. There were whispers, stories behind the scenes about why he stayed so private. People in Hollywood talk, and over time, a picture began to form. Madison had formed deep connections with several men in the industry, men who, like him, kept their truth hidden to protect their careers. As he grew older and the fame faded, Madison changed. He was no longer under the constant pressure of being the perfect hero. In quiet moments during interviews and at private gatherings, he began to speak more freely about the people who had truly mattered to him. He never wrote a tell-all or made a grand announcement, but those close to him said that in the last years of his life, he wanted to honor those friendships. One of the most moving interviews came from a close friend of Madison's who said, "He didn't name names to shock people. He did it because those people meant something to him. He carried them in his heart for years, and toward the end, he just didn't want them to be forgotten." As the years passed, Madison became less of a movie star and more of a quiet figure who held on to the stories that shaped him. He never sought attention, but he wanted to bring peace to the memory of those he loved. In his final years, those who visited him said he spoke less about fame and more about connection. Madison's list of close friends included major Hollywood names. Some were expected, others were a surprise. Let's tell you about them. Madison and Rock Hudson. People loved Guy Madison and Rock Hudson for more than just their looks. They had that rare, effortless charm that made audiences feel safe, seen, and entertained. In the golden age of Hollywood, these two men were symbols of strength and romance on screen. But off-screen, they were navigating a very different kind of story, one that could never be spoken aloud. Both were discovered and groomed for fame by the same man, Henry Willson, a Hollywood power player who knew how to shape a star and hide a secret. That connection brought Madison and Hudson into the same circles. often attending private parties, sharing long weekends away from cameras, and developing a friendship that many say ran far deeper than what the public ever saw. They never spoke openly about their bond, but people who were close to them could feel it. One of Madison's lifelong friends, Don Burnett, said at his funeral, "Guy was a loyal soul. He knew how to keep a secret. He carried so many hearts quietly." That one sentence was enough to stir old Hollywood insiders. Some whispered that Madison and Hudson had once dated in secret. A quiet romance hidden under the pressure of studio contracts, tabloid threats, and the fear of being ruined by the truth. It wasn't unusual in those days for actors to play straight roles by day and live shadow lives by night. And Hudson, whose homosexuality only became public after his heartbreaking AIDS diagnosis in 1984, was perhaps the most tragic example of that reality. After Hudson's death in 1985 from AIDS-related illness, people began piecing together the personal puzzle he had worked so hard to keep hidden. Madison, already retired from acting and living quietly in California, never gave interviews on the matter. But those who had seen the two together at private beach gatherings, quiet dinners, or movie sets say the connection was more than just professional. They looked out for each other, one former set worker remembered. You could tell there was something soft between them, something trusting. In a time when love could ruin a career, their relationship, whatever shape it took, had to exist between stolen moments and silent looks. Madison never revealed the truth, and maybe that's what made it last. In a city full of performances, theirs may have been the most human of all, unseen but deeply felt. Let's now tell you about another close friend of Madison, Anthony Perkins and Madison. You must agree that we admired Guy Madison and Anthony Perkins for very different reasons, yet both captured hearts in ways that made them unforgettable. Madison had that all-American hero look, tall, strong, and steady. He was the cowboy every young boy wanted to grow up to be, and every girl hoped would ride in to rescue her. Anthony Perkins, on the other hand, was mysterious. He wasn't the typical tough guy. He had a nervous charm and a thoughtful face that made people want to understand him. His role as Norman Bates in Psycho chilled audiences, but off-screen, he was gentle and deeply sensitive. Both men carried the weight of fame, and both had to carry something else too: secrets. Hollywood in the 1950s was no place to be openly gay. Studios controlled everything, including their actors' personal lives. Careers could be destroyed overnight by a single rumor. That pressure forced many stars into quiet, hidden relationships. Anthony Perkins was known to have had a romantic connection with actor Tab Hunter. The two were deeply fond of each other but kept it all private. Interviews with Hunter years later confirmed what many had suspected. They loved each other, but fear kept them in the shadows. What many people don't know is that Guy Madison was part of that quiet circle too. According to insiders, Madison and Perkins had a close bond, one that went beyond casual friendship. People who worked on sets and at studio parties often noticed how the two men would seek each other out. One studio assistant from that era recalled, "There was something calm about them when they were together. They didn't have to put on a show for each other." While neither of them spoke publicly about their personal connection, people close to Madison say he had a quiet way of caring for those he was close to. He wasn't loud about his feelings. He didn't write letters or give grand gestures. But if he showed up for you, he stayed. A longtime friend of Madison once said, "He kept people's secrets like they were treasures. If he loved you, he protected you." It's likely that Madison and Perkins found comfort in each other's silence. In a world where every smile was studied and every glance could become gossip, Having someone who understood that kind of pressure must have meant everything. Maybe that is why their relationship, whatever form it took, left a mark on those who knew them. It wasn't loud, it wasn't famous, but it was real, and that's what makes it unforgettable. Another name from Madison's friends list is Montgomery Clift. What people loved most about Montgomery Clift was the emotion in his eyes. He didn't need big speeches or loud performances to move an audience. One look, one pause, and you felt everything he was going through. He wasn't like the other leading men of the time who played strong, confident heroes. Clift brought something real, something broken and beautiful. He made you care. Guy Madison, on the other hand, had that clean-cut charm that made him a natural cowboy, soldier, or loyal friend on screen. He seemed strong, steady, and sure of himself. But both men, in their own quiet way, were carrying something the cameras couldn't capture. Montgomery Clift's personal life was one of the most closely guarded mysteries in Hollywood. Within private circles, people knew he was bisexual. He had relationships with both men and women, but he never said anything in public. He didn't need to. He protected his privacy fiercely, not out of shame, but because the world wasn't ready. Guy Madison understood that struggle. The two men moved in the same Hollywood circles. They both worked under powerful studios, attended the same private gatherings, and knew what it meant to smile for cameras while keeping real life hidden behind the scenes. Over time, their connection grew. While there are no public statements from either of them, people who worked closely on sets and behind closed doors noticed something gentle between them. One makeup artist from a film Clift worked on shared in a later interview, "Guy would stop by quietly sometimes. They weren't loud. They would sit and talk for hours. It felt safe between them." Another insider from that era said, "Monty let very few people in, but Madison was one of the few he trusted." Their bond may not have had a label. Maybe it didn't need one. But those who saw them together described a closeness that felt different. They shared an understanding. Madison, who was also careful with his private life, gave Clift space to be himself without questions. That kind of safety was rare in Hollywood. Clift struggled with many things over the years: pain from a terrible car accident, emotional battles, and the pressure of hiding too much for too long. But in those quiet moments with Madison, people say he looked lighter, more at peace. Theirs wasn't a romance that made headlines. Moving forward, we have William Haines. He had charm, humor, and that unmistakable movie star glow. But what truly set William Haines apart was the way he lived his truth, even when it cost him everything. In the 1920s and 30s, at a time when the studio system controlled every detail of a star's image, Haines refused to lie about who he was. He chose love over fame. When MGM told him to marry a woman to keep up appearances, he said no. That decision ended his acting career, but it gave him something else: a full life, lived honestly, alongside the man he loved, Jimmy Shields. Decades later, a different kind of Hollywood had taken shape. It was still filled with secrets, but also quiet survivors. Guy Madison came up in this world. He was handsome, polite, and carefully managed by the same system that once punished Haines. While Madison never spoke openly about his private life, he moved through the same circles that still remembered Haines's bravery. The two men came from different Hollywood generations, yet insiders say their paths crossed more than once. According to a former designer who worked with Haines in the late 1950s, Madison visited his studio not just for design advice, but for quiet conversation. It wasn't just about picking out curtains, the man said in a recorded interview. They would talk for hours. Haines liked him. said he was smart and respectful. You could tell Guy admired him. Those close to Haines said he had a soft spot for actors who were struggling to live between two worlds. He world the public expected, and the private one that felt real. He saw that in Madison. One friend of Haines recalled, "Billy used to say, 'That boy carries a lot on his shoulders, and he never complains.'" Though Haines had left acting behind, he still shaped lives in quieter ways. He created safe spaces not just with his designs, but with his presence. Madison, known for being careful with his feelings and loyal to his friends, found something rare in Haines. A mentor, maybe. A mirror. No letters were saved. No photos ever confirmed anything more than friendship. But for those who remember how Hollywood used to be, their bond stands out. One man who refused to lie, and another who learned from that strength. Sometimes, the most powerful stories are not the ones on the screen, but the ones that happened quietly, in between the scenes. Other than William, Farley Granger is another big name in Madison's secret friends. Farley Granger. You must remember Farley Granger for the cool elegance he brought to the screen. His roles in films like Strangers on a Train made him a household name. With his sharp looks and sophisticated charm, he had a way of making every moment count. Yet behind that smooth exterior, Granger lived a life that was anything but simple. Known for being openly bisexual at a time when Hollywood demanded secrecy, he had relationships with both men and women, most notably his long-term partnership with Robert Calhoun. But there was another connection Granger had, one that wasn't as widely known. That connection was with Guy Madison. To the public, Madison was the all-American hero, the strong, reliable leading man. But behind the scenes, he shared a bond with Granger that many insiders would only whisper about. Their relationship wasn't plastered across gossip columns, and no photographers ever captured their moments together. But people who worked closely with both men knew there was something there. Something more than just professional respect. An old friend of Madison's, who worked as a set designer, once shared, "They were friends, but it was like they understood each other on a level that was rare for stars back then." Hollywood was a lot about keeping up appearances, but those two had a quiet respect for each other. You could see it in the way they'd share stories, just talking for hours in a corner. Granger, who was never one to shy away from his truth, likely saw in Madison someone who understood the pressure of keeping a public persona intact. Madison, on the other hand, was known to be guarded, rarely letting anyone see behind the mask he wore for the world. But with Granger, he seemed to let his guard down. "Farley had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room," said one insider who observed their interactions. Guy looked at him differently, with this quiet admiration. It wasn't about what the press expected. They were just two men who had a lot to talk about. Madison's loyalty to his friends was always evident. Even though they weren't out in the open, their friendship meant something deeper. Granger, in his own way, had always been ahead of his time, living authentically while navigating Hollywood's complex rules. For Madison, who had to be more secretive, it was a safe space. Together, they shared what many other stars could never experience: genuine camaraderie in a world that demanded perfection. You won't find their story in a tabloid or on any red carpet. But for those who knew them, the bond between Guy Madison and Farley Granger was real, quiet, and lasting. The next big name from Madison Friends list is Henry Willson. Henry Willson was one of Hollywood's most influential talent agents, shaping the careers of stars like Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter, and Guy Madison. While his professional life was well known, there were whispers about the more personal relationships he shared with his clients. and one of the most persistent rumors surrounded his connection with Madison. It was said that the two secretly dated, although no one ever confirmed it. Madison, known for his strong, reliable screen persona, kept his private life under tight wraps, much like many other stars of the era. His public image as the all-American hero made him one of the most bankable stars of his time. But behind closed doors, he was more reserved, careful about what he shared with the public. Willson, on the other hand, was an expert at managing his clients' images and had a deep understanding of how to navigate the private lives of Hollywood's brightest stars. According to an insider who worked closely with both men, their relationship went beyond the typical agent-client dynamic. Willson wasn't just Guy's agent. He was a confidant, someone he trusted with his life, the insider revealed. There was a lot of time spent together off-screen, and you could tell they shared something more. People whispered about them often, but no one dared confront it directly. There was a bond that seemed much deeper than business. Another Hollywood associate who worked with Willson during the 1950s added, "Henry had this way of creating a space where his clients felt safe, even with their secrets." With Guy, he understood what was at stake. He helped him navigate the pressures of being a public figure while keeping his private life guarded. These quiet, behind-the-scenes moments between Madison and Willson have remained part of Hollywood's shadowy past. While no one can say for certain what their relationship was, the rumors suggest it was something personal and meaningful. In a time when secrecy ruled the lives of stars, Willson was a master at both crafting and protecting his clients' public personas. And for Madison, having someone like him in his corner must have been invaluable. Their bond, whatever it may have been, was one of Hollywood's best-kept secrets. And while it may never be fully revealed, it's clear that Willson and Madison shared something that went beyond the professional. It was a connection that spoke to the unspoken realities of Hollywood life, a time when stars like Madison needed someone who could protect their privacy and navigate their carefully hidden worlds. After Willson, Robert Mitchum also shared a close bond with Madison. Robert Mitchum and a Madison. There was something raw and real about Robert Mitchum that people couldn't forget. He had that effortless cool, a rugged charm that made audiences believe every character he played. Whether he was the tough guy with a heart or the outsider with a mysterious past, Mitchum always looked like he belonged in the shadows, yet somehow stole the spotlight. Guy Madison, on the other hand, was the clean-cut hero. His image was polished, the kind of face America trusted. But behind those differences was something that drew the two men together, an unspoken bond that insiders say went much deeper than the public ever saw. They came up around the same time, built careers that mirrored each other in many ways. Both served in the military before making it big in Hollywood. Both were often cast as masculine, dependable figures, but those who were close to the studio scene back then say the two shared more than just career paths. A retired publicist once said in a private interview, "There was a quiet loyalty between Mitchum and Madison. They weren't loud about their friendship, but they were always around each other when it mattered. People noticed, even if no one ever said anything openly." The rumors were always just below the surface. They weren't flashy or scandalous in the way other Hollywood stories were, but there was a persistent belief that Mitchum and Madison had a deeply personal connection they kept hidden. A close acquaintance from the Warner Brothers lot recalled, "Mitchum didn't let many people in, but with Guy it was different. You could see a comfort there, like they didn't need to explain anything to each other. They had a routine, meetings after hours, drives to quiet places, talks that lasted for hours. It wasn't like the other studio friendships. It had more weight." Both men were experts at controlling their public image, and they knew how to play the game. Mitchum acted like nothing could touch him, while Madison wore his calm like armor. But those who observed them closely said that when the cameras were off, they dropped that act around each other. They had a rhythm, a closeness that didn't need to be spoken aloud. One former set assistant put it simply, whatever they had, it was real. It might not have had a name, but it was real. Though neither ever confirmed anything about their bond, the way they stuck by each other told its own story. In a town where everyone was watching, Robert Mitchum and Guy Madison found a way to share something that was entirely their own. Another big name close to Madison is John Wayne. There is something timeless about John Wayne. His towering presence, steady voice, and larger-than-life roles made him the face of American westerns. People admired how he carried himself, both on screen and off. He looked like the kind of man who could face anything without flinching. But what many people don't know is that behind that bold image was a quieter side of Wayne that he rarely showed. And one of the few people who ever got to see it was Guy Madison. Madison, known for his clean-cut image and charm, was also a regular face in westerns. He played brave sheriffs and soldiers, always doing the right thing in the most difficult situations. While their roles often placed them in similar cinematic worlds, their off-screen bond was something that grew slowly and with great care. According to several people who worked on Western sets in the 1950s, John Wayne and Guy Madison developed a friendship that surprised many. One longtime set decorator recalled, "They didn't look like a pair who would hang out. Wayne was loud and commanding. Guy was quiet and polite. But something just clicked between them." They were often seen spending time together during breaks in filming. Not just casual chats, but real conversations, long ones that would stretch into late hours after the crew had packed up. Another crew member from a 1954 Western shoot said, "You'd see them walking off together after filming, talking low and serious. They had their own way of communicating. No one dared ask what they were talking about. But you could tell it wasn't just about movies." People close to both stars said the friendship was built on respect. Wayne admired Madison's discipline and how he stayed out of trouble, while Madison appreciated Wayne's strength and leadership. But there were whispers, too, soft, private talk in studio corridors that their bond may have held something more. Nothing ever confirmed, of course. But in Hollywood, the loudest stories are sometimes the ones never spoken. What is clear is that they trusted each other. In an industry full of competition and image building, they created space to simply be themselves. Madison once said in an old interview, "I learned from the best. Some people taught me how to act. Some taught me how to survive here. Duke taught me both." Whatever the truth behind their friendship, it was one of deep connection and understanding. In a world full of cameras and masks, John Wayne and Guy Madison found a rare kind of honesty with each other, the kind that never needed to be explained. Next, we have Andy Devine and Madison. Andy Devine had one of those voices you never forget. Raspy, warm, and full of life. It was the kind of voice that made people smile before he even finished a sentence. On screen, he was always the loyal sidekick, the heart of the story, bringing humor and charm to even the tensest scenes. But behind that friendly face was a man full of wisdom, someone who had seen the rough side of Hollywood and still held on to his kindness. When he teamed up with Guy Madison on The Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok, it wasn't just another job. It marked the beginning of a deep and lasting bond that would shape both their lives. Madison played the heroic Wild Bill, steady and strong, while Devine played his trusty sidekick, Jingles. Their chemistry was natural, easy, and full of fun. Audiences loved watching them ride across dusty trails and solve problems with courage and wit. But what people didn't see was how that connection on screen reflected something real off-screen. A former crew member from the series once said, "They were never just acting. What you saw on set, that was real friendship. They laughed together, looked out for each other. There was a respect there that went both ways." Devine, who had been in the industry much longer, became a mentor to Madison. He helped him navigate the business, warned him about the traps, and encouraged him to stay grounded. According to a close friend of Divine's, Andy treated Guy like family. He'd invite him to dinner, bring him around his kids. It wasn't just about work. They built a real bond. Some who were close to the show whispered that their connection ran deeper than most co-star friendships. Nothing was ever said directly, but people noticed how they trusted each other, how they stayed close long after the show ended. One assistant who worked on the final season remembered, "Even when the cameras stopped rolling, they stuck together. If one of them had a bad day, the other would know without saying a word. That's how in sync they were." Their friendship became one of the strongest parts of the show's legacy. Long after Wild Bill Hickok stopped airing, fans remembered not just the action, but the warmth between the two leads. Guy Madison may have been the star in name, but in many ways, it was Andy Devine who gave the show its heart. And in return, Madison gave Devine a friendship that was real, lasting, and quietly powerful, something that didn't need a spotlight to shine. As the years went by, their bond remained unshaken. Even as they pursued different paths after Wild Bill Hickok, they never lost touch. They would exchange letters, meet up during industry events, and check in on each other's families. When Devine's health began to decline in the later part of his life, Madison made it a point to visit him whenever he could. "He didn't just disappear like so many others do in this business," said Devine's son. "He stayed around. He showed up. That meant a lot to Dad." In the end, their friendship stood as a quiet reminder that even in an industry driven by fame and fleeting moments, genuine human connection could still thrive. Andy Devine may be best remembered for his laugh, his voice, and his unforgettable presence on screen, but those who knew him best will always remember the bond he shared with Guy Madison as one of the truest parts of his legacy. Which of these names from Madison's close friend circle surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to click the cards on screen for more untold Hollywood stories.